Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. Well, am I the only one who's sort of worried that there's going to be no more genre programs on television? With the recent Bloodbath at the CW, I'm starting to worry. Now, we knew they weren't going to renew Batwoman, but most people were surprised when they also didn't renew Legends of Tomorrow. And then they came out and cancelled 7 shows in one day, because they hadn't actually technically cancelled the other 2 shows, but they're not renewing slash cancelling 9 shows, and they cancelled 7 on one day. It was pretty big. Now, the CW has been known for being a very diverse network. They had a lot of shows that had strong fan bases, but weren't really big on the views. It wasn't a big network, but they were fairly loyal to their fan bases. They were fairly dedicated to diversity, representation, and genre. And I thought it was a great network. I mean, I never saw it myself because I'm in Australia. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just really shocking. And the history of the channels, of course, was Paramount back in the 70s wanted to create a 4th network. And they were going to have Star Trek as their sort of tentpole. And it fell through and they made Star Trek Motion Picture instead. Now, years later, Fox came out, and I think they were the 4th network. And then Paramount launched UPN, United Paramount Network. And that did okay for a while. It was never a big network. It never was really successful. They had a couple of good shows like Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Enterprise, but eventually the companies Viacom and Paramount were going to split, and they found out that they were going to lose the licensing and rights and everything. They'd basically be making TV programs for another. That CBS was going to own all the TV shows Paramount owned, so UPN would be making shows for CBS. So it just didn't work. They cancelled all the shows, and basically the network just folded like the next year. So that was a pity, because Star Trek Enterprise rated, it wasn't a ratings issue, but it was a licensing and a network thing. And eventually they basically, I think Warner Brothers had their own channel, I can't remember what it was called, and they folded as well. And then they merged into the CW, which was UPN and whatever Warner Brothers had. So Warner Brothers, I don't know what they had. I can't remember now, because like I said, I didn't get those channels on in Australia. I just sort of got the programs on our local stations and sort of knew the politics of what was happening. But CW lasted for a while. They started in 2006. And what's that, like 16 years or something that they've had dedicated genre programs, and sort of not caring about finances as much as the fan bases. And, I've got to give them some credit for having some artistic integrity and some, just not just thinking about the money. But unfortunately, if you don't do that, it's not a really good business model, and you do lose money. And the people who are paying for it may not want to keep paying for it for artistic reasons. So Warner Brothers is selling the CW. I guess they're hoping someone else will take it on with the same sort of philosophy. But yeah, they cancelled all the shows. Now, I heard a funny excuse for why they're cancelling the shows. Someone was saying it's because Warner Brothers didn't want to pay for the studio space to hold all the sets and to keep filming. And I'm like, that's the most ridiculous excuse I've ever heard. Obviously, if the show's not doing well and you're going to cancel it, you're gonna not pay for the studio space anymore. But if your show is doing well, you're going to keep it going, and you're not going to care about paying for the studio space. That's part of the budget. So the idea that that's the excuse, and it wasn't that they didn't rate well and they didn't earn a lot of money, and that's what they're caring about more with the sale. They need to make the channel more profitable so they can sell it for more money. So, and the people who buy it are going to want to make money, so they're getting rid of all the shows that are low rated, even if they had artistic merit or social, cultural merit. They didn't, have financial merit, so that's the end of that. Now, there's some people who are trying to save Batwoman. They've got a HBO Save Batwoman and a Save Batwoman hashtag, and they're doing campaigning, they're putting up billboards and stuff. They did the same thing when Enterprise got cancelled, because a lot of fans didn't want it to end. And when it ended, it was quite a shock, and how it ended, because I think a lot of fans like me had grown entitled to Star Trek, because we'd always had it. And for people like me who believed in the philosophical side of the show, the moral side of the show, as opposed to just the generic sci-fi sort of action-adventure side of the show, we sort of felt that it was owed to us as a culture. And we were always it was always celebrated, and we believed, that's what it was about. It was really just about it made money. When it didn't make as much money, or they were losing the licensing, they weren't going to make the money anymore. They cut it, and they cut the the StarTrek.com, all the Star Trek magazines, everything that was running, that we thought was running for us, was running for profit. They cut it all. And we just had this absolute death of Star Trek in 2005. And it came back a couple of years later in a different form, which is, won't go into that. But I can see some people sort of having the same struggles with Batwoman being cancelled and trying to save it. Like they did a Save Star Trek campaign. They raised a lot of money, and they tried to raise enough money to actually fund a 5th season of the show. They didn't manage it, but they got fairly close. And they weren't trying to do that with this show. They were trying to get enough money to campaign for it, because they think if they can get HBO Max to take it on, because one of the things that was keeping these shows alive was they had deals with Netflix and HBO Max where the shows, they would air on the CW, and then they'd go to CBS, HBO Max and Netflix and be streaming. So, and Netflix had a lot of them. I think there were a couple they had first that were cancelled. There was a bit of confusion because some of the shows were cancelled a while back, not because of merit or ratings, but because they were losing them to a different streaming service. So Netflix cancelled them before. They didn't want to build someone else's brand, basically, so they cancelled them early. So there's been a lot of politics around the different networks and channels and branding and everything, and the streaming services, and how Netflix used to be the one big one, and now it's like everyone wants their own streaming service. It's just a big, huge mess. And I'm just worried about genre TV in general, because especially the ones that cater to diversity and representation and minorities, because I'm a minority, I get it, but we need, I don't want to say this to my brothers and sisters, but at the end of the day, we're not the majority, we are the minority, and we just can't support mainstream shows, because mainstream audiences, they're like us, they want to see their own stories, they don't really want to see our stories. Now, small channels, small movies, independent movies, stuff like that, yeah, we can have shows that are targeted for specific audiences, but that's okay if they've got a small budget. But if they've got a big budget, like some of these superhero shows and genre shows, they just can't do it. They tried, and they managed to do it for a good decade or more, but it's not going to fly long term. This was an issue back in the day, like the original Star Trek was mostly cancelled because it cost a lot of money, not because it didn't have decent ratings and a lot of fans. Next Generation was done for syndication. It was sold directly to networks, stations, not to, like, it wasn't just on one network like a regular network show would have been. That was Deep Space Nine and Next Gen. They had huge ratings that way. They put Voyager and Enterprise on UPN. They lost a lot of ratings in that sense, but they had their network. They made money from that. So it was all about exploiting the IP and the fan base for financial profit, not actually making a show because we have to make a Star Trek show because there has to be a Star Trek show. It's the same thing with Batwoman. There doesn't have to be a Batwoman show as far as, the finance people, are concerned. So I get it, but at the end of the day, we need to just accept. I mean, we're never going to, and we should never go back to the days of all white audience or white shows for white audiences, because the audience isn't all white. But we're just going to have to accept that we're going to be part of the cast as diversity and representation, but we're not going to be the centre of the stories and the leaders of the shows anymore, unless they're small and catering to the small audience. If you want the mainstream audience, you're not going to get it through minorities and diversity and representation, because, like I said, the mainstream general audience, they just don't care because they want to see their stories. It doesn't make them racist or homophobic. It just makes them narcissistic, and they just want to see themselves reflected in TV like we do. And we never saw ourselves. Now we get to see ourselves more. That's good. But still, we can't expect to take over. It was never going to happen. So they tried, and yeah, I just wish people would get that, because it's going to save them a lot of pain. I mean, I love Star Trek. It's that they have their new Trek, and it's not as good. It's not the same, but it is developing its own audience, and general audiences who didn't like Star Trek because it was too preachy and too intellectual, and too talky and too slow. There's enough of them to keep those shows afloat that they never have to go back to making real Star Trek. Even though there's a dedicated fan base of intelligent, articulate, sophisticated people who love that show and are committed to it and support it, there's just as many average audience members who aren't as sophisticated or intelligent or articulate or discerning, who will just watch whatever's on. That's the sad truth I'm realising. New Trek is probably not going to go away because they've got enough people to support it. So my mouth's really dry. I'm going to stop talking. I got to 10 minutes. I think I made all the points I wanted to anyway. But yeah, I mean, I'm accepting that, you know, the kind of shows I love aren't necessarily going to keep being made like they have been recently. And it's just something we need to just accept and just be okay with the fact that we're going to get representation and diversity, but, you know, it's going to be in measure. And that's how it should be. And hopefully that's how it will be. Hopefully we won't go backwards. But it needed to level out at some point. I think it's kind of doing that. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But I'm going to go. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Bye.